Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in just a few moments, so hang on tight and we'll start in about 2 minutes. Hey, Seth.
Yeah, give me a second. Good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Anderson. I work in our national programs here at My Brother's Keeper Alliance. I wanted to take a moment and thank everyone for joining this webinar today to learn more about a critical topic regarding youth and traumatic events. I also wanted to highlight the importance of the partnership MBK Alliance has with Mentor and thank them sincerely for being a great ally, partner in helping youth, practitioners, and leaders in this space to gain knowledge and resources to help their communities. We have co-hosted many webinars over the last couple of years, and we've had nearly 1,000 people register for these webinars to gain better resources and knowledge, as I said, to help their communities. So I also want to just truly thank all of you for joining today, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Delia Hagen.
Great, thank you so much, Seth. So hello again, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, an introduction to the Supporting Young People in the Wake of Violence Guide. My name is Delia Hagen, and I'm a program manager at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. We're very excited to be here with you all today for what we hope will be a useful and interactive conversation about how mentors can support young people who have faced experiences with violence and traumatic events, based on a guide that was recently created by Mentor, JPMorgan Chase and Company, and the Mental Health Association of New York. Today's webinar, as Seth said, was brought to you by a partnership between Mentor and My Brother's Keeper Alliance. We're collaborating to bring you a webinar series to help you learn about and apply best practices for building strong relationships and designing effective mentoring services. Today's webinar is the 5th that we've had in the past year, and you can see past webinar topics listed here on this slide. Mentor and My Brother's Keeper Alliance have also collaborated on virtual trainings and a guidebook for mentoring boys and young men of color. All of the previously recorded webinars and virtual trainings are available through this link that you see here on the screen. Early next week, you'll receive an email guiding you to this website, which will contain a recording of the slides from today's presentation. So be on the lookout for that email so you can access the materials we cover today. So before we really get started, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's webinar. So as you've probably noticed, all phone lines have been muted for best sound quality. We find that on larger convenings like this, there's often some unintended feedback on the line. So all attendees are in listen-only mode so we can better hear our panelists. However, we want this to be an interactive experience for you all, so we hope that you'll use the questions box that you see on your side panel to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll be queuing up those questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. So don't hesitate to ask any questions you have throughout the presentation. We certainly hope you do. And the questions that we share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden and deepen the conversation. Nearly 100 people registered for today's webinar, so we may not get to every question, but we certainly will try our best. Another way you can participate in today's webinar is by answering questions about yourself through our polls. We'd like to start by doing a couple of polls to see who's on the line today. Our first poll asks, what is your experience level in the youth development field? You can choose beginner, experienced, or expert. And we'll give you about 10 seconds or so to respond before we read out our results. Okay, great. So it looks like about 11% of us are beginners, so newbies in the mentoring field. We have 63%, most of us are intermediate, so have been maybe in the field for some time, and about 26% identify as experts. So we definitely have some experienced folks on the line as well. That's great. Thank you. And we're going to launch one more poll before we move on, which is, the question is, what is your role in the youth development field? You can choose mentoring practitioner, researcher, government entity, school staff, or other, and you can specify. We'll give you just a few seconds to respond before we read out your results. Okay, let's see who's with us. We've got 67%. Oh, wow. So definitely a majority of folks on the line are mentoring practitioners. But we do have some researchers, about 8%, and government entities, 8% as well. No school staff with us, and we do have about 17% who have said other. Just looking to see if folks have specified. Yep, looks like we've got some affiliates of Mentor, some of our state affiliates on the line, intermediaries, and some administrative folks. So thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that today's information will be applicable to everybody on the line, and we're excited to have you with us. So as I said earlier, my name is Delia Hagen. I'm a program manager here at Mentor, and I'm honored to facilitate today's webinar about such an important topic. I'd like to give you some background about Mentor's partnership with JPMorgan Chase and the guide that we're going to be discussing today to help frame our conversation. Mentor has collaborated with JPMorgan Chase for the past 3 years to build a field of support to expand opportunities for young men of color through effective mentoring. Through our partnership, we've developed training, tools, and research briefs to support young people and their mentors who are part of the fellowship initiative. You'll hear more detail on that from Linda Rodriguez and Rudy Lozano later about the fellowship initiative. One of the tools we created as part of our partnership is the Guide to Supporting Young People in the Wake of Violence and Trauma. In the fall of 2016, the JPMorgan Chase TFI team let Mentor know that TFI mentors had begun expressing concerns about their mentees who were dealing with daily tragedies in their communities. This concern arose primarily from the episodes of police violence and brutality and the loss of young people of color's lives at the hands of police. Young people like Paul O'Neill, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and countless others. These tragedies left many mentors feeling ill-equipped to address and process these events with their mentees. Mentors sensed the fear that their mentees were facing, and they struggled to bring up these issues and talk about them sensitively and effectively. They needed guidance and recommendations for how to begin these conversations and understand their role as a support system for youth. So Mentor collaborated with JPMorgan Chase TFI leaders, as well as the Mental Health Association of New York, to create this resource in response to these concerns. I had the privilege of being a part of this team. As we brainstormed recommendations and important tips for mentors based on mentoring and youth development best practices, we recognized the diverse experiences that youth have with violence and trauma, from experiences with discrimination that impact their lives directly to issues of oppression and injustice influencing their communities on a systemic level. We recognize the broad range of challenges that young people have with regard to equity and justice, from racial profiling to discrimination based on sexuality and gender, to pervasive challenges like food injustice and homelessness that impact whole communities. As a result, this resource was broadened to address a wider range of negative experiences that young people may face with regard to violence and trauma, and to provide a general framework for mentors to help them gain insight into the challenges that youth face, understand their role as an ally to young people, and communicate effectively as they provide this critical support. And as we created this resource, we knew that a webinar would help us unpack some of these recommendations a bit and help mentors and mentoring practitioners apply its insights to the specific communities and groups they wanted to serve. So this is the goal of our panelists today, who I'll introduce in a moment. As our panelists will discuss later, this resource provides concrete strategies, recommendations, and guidelines for all mentors to help them have conversations with youth about the challenges they face related to violence and traumatic events. This is a very sensitive topic for many adults, not to mention young people. And as a result, you'll find that this resource emphasizes self-reflection and awareness of one's own triggers as a mentor. It also encourages mentors to seek help and support from others and to partner with others to help young people make sense of their experiences, find hope, and create meaningful change. And now I'd like to introduce our three panelists, Linda Rodriguez, Rudy Lozano, and Hilda Marie. Linda Rodriguez is the head of the Fellowship Initiative, TFI, and leads National Youth Employment Strategies for Global Philanthropy at JPMorgan Chase & Company. Developed by this firm in 2010, TFI prepares young men of color for academic and professional success. In 2014, Linda led the successful expansion of the TFI to 3 markets, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City, more than quadrupling the size of the program. Prior to joining JPMorgan, Linda served as an assistant commissioner at the Department of Youth and Community Development, New York City's Youth Development Funding Agency, which funded the nation's largest out-of-school time, OST, system in the city's youth employment system. While leading DYCD's capacity building department, Linda oversaw technical assistance services for hundreds of youth development organizations and organized the city's first OST STEM-themed professional development conference. For 20 years, Linda has worked for leading national youth and workforce development organizations, including the After School Corporation, Expand Ed, SeedCo, Community Service Society of New York, and the Posse Foundation. She has also authored several articles and resource guides for the field. Linda earned her master's degree at the University of Virginia and her bachelor's at Wesleyan. As the first person to complete college in her family, Linda is proud to contribute to the firm's efforts and expand economic opportunities for youth. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
Rudy Lozano is a program manager for the Fellowship Initiative in Chicago. For 20 years, Rudy has been a leader in the youth development and community organizing fields in Chicago. He has held positions in nationally recognized organizations, including the Association House of Chicago, Instituto del Progreso Latino, and Enlace Chicago. His diverse experiences include mentoring at-risk youth, teaching in alternative high schools, providing career guidance and employment services to youth, and launching the nationally recognized Community Schools program at the Little Village Lawndale High School. He is an alum of Public Allies and Leadership Greater Chicago. Rudy earned his bachelor's degree in youth and community organizing from Northeastern Illinois University and his master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Hello, Rudy, and welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
And finally, Hilda Marie has worked in the mental health field for 30 years and has dedicated her career to helping individuals recover from trauma. Currently, Ms. Marie is a program director at the Mental Health Association of New York City, where she provides emotional wellness assessments and services to the young men of the Fellowship Initiative. She became ordained as an interfaith minister in 2002 at the New Seminary for Interfaith Studies and is a certified youth and mental health first aid instructor. Hilda has taught psychology courses at CUNY, the City University of New York, and has served as a mental health consultant for numerous social service agencies in New York City, including Safe Horizon, Sanctuary for Families, Lavelle School for the Blind, and the Center for Elimination of Violence in the Family. Ms. Marie is also a board member at the Aldea Counseling Services in West Harlem. Hilda holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from York College and a master's degree in psychology from the City College of New York, CUNY. Welcome, Hilda, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Delia.
And now I'd like to turn it over to Linda to share more about JPMorgan Chase's TFI program.
Thank you, Delia, and thank you to the teams at Mentor and MBK for providing us with an opportunity to contribute to this critical conversation. I also just wanted to thank everyone on the call for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this webinar. I know it isn't easy to carve out time for these kinds of conversations. And this is such an important topic, and I just want to say we really appreciate the tremendous work that's happening across the country to support young men of color. Prior to joining JPMorgan a few years ago to lead the expansion of TFI, I spent my career in the nonprofit sector and more recently in government. And what drew me to this program and to JPMorgan was the extraordinary commitment that the firm made to the fellowship initiative, which was created in 2010 in response to growing concerns about outcomes for young men of color. As you heard from Delia, through TFI we currently serve young people in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City. If you turn to slide 11, you will see a somewhat deconstructed logic model that captures our theory of change for TFI. In a nutshell, when we think about the design of the program and the services that we provide every day, we think about what we as humans, what all humans really need to be successful. Maybe that sounds a little bit lofty, but when we think about some of the advantages that young people from affluent families have, it is clear that they are not getting targeted, isolated interventions based on their deficits or whatever crisis they're experiencing in those moments. They're receiving sustained long-term supports and opportunities to discover their talents and strengths, and yes, to also help address challenges or barriers that may prevent them from achieving their full potential. So that leads me back to our theory of change, which is that we can improve education and employment outcomes for young men of color by focusing on skills development, supporting social-emotional learning and growth, and providing access to resources and opportunities to meet their needs. We take every opportunity with the fellows to affirm their talent and nurture their dreams, and to help them see that the world is much bigger than what they may have experienced in their everyday lives. Programmatically, this translates into each fellow having a mentor for 3 years, and those are JPMorgan Chase employees whose passion for the program moves me in my job every day, plus the amazing staff on our team like Rudy who work with the students and service coaches throughout their time in the program. All told, this is about 30 days each year of learning outside of the school day that happens throughout the year, mostly on Saturdays, and many life-changing experiences during the summer, from Outward Bound Wilderness Leadership Programs to Global Leadership Program in South Africa last year. I think that's the photo on slide 9 or 10 in your deck. The last thing I'll say about our model before pivoting to why we wanted to create this guide is that TFI targets young men of color in the academic middle, C and B students. This is part of what is unique about our approach. We believe in the potential that all young people have to succeed, not just the students who are already on a path to success. And obviously there are a lot of programs serving those students, and that work is incredibly important too. We just felt like there was an opportunity for us to say, if we could leverage the resources that we have at JPMorgan, our employee, the talent, the opportunities that we might be able to provide, can we help young people who otherwise might not have those opportunities achieve more than they thought possible. As you heard during the introduction, the creation of this guide was inspired by conversations that we were having in the aftermath of incidents of violence in our cities. Even as experienced youth development professionals, which a fair amount of us are on this call, we're often confronted by conversations and situations that young people are experiencing, moments of extraordinary suffering and sadness that sometimes we don't even know how to respond to. And when you think about mentors and all of the different backgrounds that mentors come to us from, we know that they also are having similar concerns and probably greater challenges figuring out how to respond. And so we turn to a group of experts that we every day are really fortunate to work with at MHA and Mentor to help us think about how we could better prepare and support our mentors to have meaningful conversations that support young people in the aftermath of violence and trauma. Regardless of what role you play in supporting young people, and it sounds like there's a nice diverse mix of us on this call, this guide was created with you in mind. We worked with Mentor and MHA to think about what policies, approaches, and resources would help to address trauma. And really, if you take a step back, it's about how to support young people regardless of whatever kind of challenging or difficult experience they're having. You'll hear a more detailed overview of the guide from Rudy and Hilda in a moment. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all again for your time and to thank Delia for facilitating this conversation for us today.
Thank you so much, Linda. And at this point, I'd love for Rudy to take it from here and tell us more about the TFI program and the guide.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for introducing TFI, Linda, and thank you for everybody who took the time to be on this call. One of the first things I'll say is that the Fellowship Initiative is very much a life-changing program for our young men, and many of the experiences that they encounter in the program are some of the firsts that they've had in their lives, and we really utilize those opportunities to build a strong network of young men of color across the country so that they can become leaders in their own communities as well. And in terms of addressing trauma, recognizing and addressing trauma, we go about this in sort of several ways, if you will. One of the main spaces for addressing these issues, various issues that our students are going through, is making sure that we create a safe space for them to communicate what's going on in their lives. And we do this in numerous ways as well. As Linda mentioned, we often meet on Saturdays all day from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., providing numerous services throughout the day. And one of the important aspects of the program is what we call share-outs. And we provide a space for students to come up in front of our cohort and share whatever's going on in their lives, whether it be positive, whether it be a challenge, or whether it's something that they're struggling with that they want feedback on. And so share-outs are a consistent part of our program throughout the 3 cities that are in the program. And with the support of Mental Health Association and Hilda in particular, we also engage our students in workshops and conversation topics such as redefining masculinity, coping with loss, anxiety, and stress. And then one of the aspects we feel is very important is asking for help and advocating for others. Another component of our program in which we're recognizing and addressing trauma is to be able to support our mentors. As Linda mentioned, we have a one-to-one mentor ratio for all of our students in the program. All of our mentors are JPMorgan employees that do this voluntarily and commit to 3 years of the program. That looks like a weekly touch point, whether that's via text, email, or phone, and in most cases it's text, and also a monthly face-to-face meeting with the fellow, and that with young men it often includes food, which is, if you know teenagers, it's the way to their heart, it's through their stomach. So they meet that often, and in order to support our mentors, we're very aware of the need to provide ongoing trainings and supports for them, and we do that by partnering with Mentor, the organization, to provide monthly webinars, such as the one we're on currently. We partner with a local partner in each city. In Chicago, it happens to be the Illinois Mentoring Partnership. We also partner with Young Chicago Authors and Gear Up to provide numerous opportunities for our fellows and mentors to engage in various activities, such as social activities, and that can include going to a bowl together. We've done ping pong tournaments, but various activities where they actually get to just hang out and get to know one another. We also provide activities of team building, trust building, and then also walking in each other's footsteps as well. So getting to know each other more than sort of our grade point average or the school you go to, but really looking at what it's like to come from a specific community in the city of Chicago or vice versa, depending on where our mentors are from as well. Another aspect of our program is making sure that we create a supportive and nurturing environment. The program intentionally develops a culture of support, brotherhood, and trust throughout the 3 years. And we do this, as Linda mentioned previously, in many ways. I would argue that many of these values come into play when the students are out of their comfort zone. So when they're on overnight trips to visit colleges as part of the program is one of the aspects. When we do our 10-day excursion with Outward Bound, which is really taking a bunch of young people out of the city and having them live outside and camp and hike, canoe, rock climb, etc. for 10 days with the leadership development component that comes with that, cooking their own food, setting up camp, breaking down camp, being in charge of leading the group, navigating, being a historian, a documentarian. These are all skills that are developed, and they're developed in very much in small group settings for the fellows. Our South Africa trip, which was an amazing opportunity to really take our young men out of the country and expose them to a whole new culture. And we were able to do this trip with the other cities as well, so we were able to bring and take 120 young men of color to South Africa for 19 days this past summer, in which they were able to meet their counterparts in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago going through the same program, and we mixed those students together so that they could really build a national network, if you will, of support. And so they were really emboldened by the opportunity to get to meet young people from across the country who are going through the same struggles, but are also overcoming those struggles and taking them on directly to improve their own lives, as well as knowing that they're a part of a group that is going to improve the overall growth of their communities as well. As a result, fellows often call each other brothers and family and can trust each other with their valuables, as well as as this demonstrated on Saturdays when we're all together in a space for several hours. We've never had an incident where someone has lost something or something was taken from them. And I do want to just share one story, but I'll end on that in terms of where the trust can go and how it's built. But there is a real importance and a value of creating a program culture that embraces and celebrates diversity, values cultural competence, and provides ongoing support for staff and mentors to strengthen skills. We create a safe space, as I mentioned previously, but even more so, we create a safe space that's critical to building the trust amongst one another. It's never negative or judgmental language or attitudes are not tolerated. The fellows, in fact, do a great job of letting each other know what they accept as friendly statements versus exclusive or judgmental statements. The examples of topics where there could be issues arising obviously are around issues like sexual identity, race and ethnicity, just different cultures, and ultimately all of our fellows come to realize sooner rather than later they are very proud of learning new cultures, of embracing diversity, and they embrace one another as such. And then I want to speak a little bit to the fact that the role of the mentors is critical in this process. Fellows depend on their mentors for support, knowledge, and experiences they don't have access to often at home. And this plays out in many roles. Specifically, one of the major goals of our program is around college entrance, and so the application process, writing their personal statements, developing skills such as networking, and all those professional skills that are important, as we know, as we go further into our career. And then I would say the other big component of this is that the fellows themselves get to become teachers and teach the mentors about their own communities, about their culture, about their upbringing, and there's a real sort of moment here where the teacher becomes the student and the student becomes the teacher, and this is a critical component. And so I'll just end with just an example of creating this space of recognizing and addressing the trauma within our program, the support that we've gotten from our partners, and how it's culminated in the fellows really being open to addressing their own issues, whatever they may be. So as I mentioned previously, in our share out is an opportunity for fellows to share about something going on in their life. And one of our fellows, who's often very quiet, very shy, introverted, took the opportunity to go up and talk about a situation, an experience he had a year ago. When he spoke, it was a year later when he was sharing his experience where he attempted suicide. And immediately the fellows in the room affirmed that he, that they needed him, that they wanted to assure that he was important, that he had value, and they, one of the fellows basically got up and said that whenever he's struggling with his mathematics or a subject area at school, he thinks about what this fellow who was just sharing that he attempted suicide a year before, that he thinks about what he would do if he was in his place. And so he looks at him as a role model when it comes to challenging situations and when he's at a crossroads. And there were many statements like that in the share out, and I would just say that since that occurred, this young man has completely turned his life around. He went from being a very withdrawn, clearly depressed young man to being very involved, taking on leadership roles in his school, and of course he still struggles. He has his highs and lows, but he's very clearly on a better path, and he's embraced the support of his fellows and the network that's been created around him. So I'll end with that, and I'll pass it back to Delia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for that powerful story. It's such a great example of what we need to be doing for our young people and the spaces that we need to be creating for them. So we really appreciate that background and that context on the TFI program as well. Before I turn things over to Hilda to dig into the guide itself and the recommendations in there, we'd just like to center our conversation as we transition by finding out how this topic relates to you, to our participants on the line. So we'd like to ask you another poll. This is our last poll. And the question is, have you worked with a young person who has experienced violence or a traumatic event that's impacted their life? Or do you know a young person who's experienced something like that? And as you answer this poll, it's just a yes or no question, but we ask you to consider typing a brief comment in the questions box if you'd like to share more information, just a brief comment about your experiences specifically with youth who have faced violence or trauma. So we'll give you a few moments to answer that question, and if you like to provide a little bit more detail in the questions box. Okay, and wow, what a powerful image to see on our screen that everybody who's on our webinar, 100% of us have known or worked with a young person who's experienced something tragic in their life. And that's exactly, I think, what all of us who have explored this topic would have expected, since it's something that's unfortunately so relevant to the work that we're doing with young people. And we're seeing some comments coming in, just giving a little bit more detail about your specific experiences. I think it's helpful to kind of frame the conversation we're about to have. Folks are saying that young people they're working with have experienced the death of a parent, the incarceration of a loved one, as an example. Folks who have experienced juvenile justice involvement and the impact of that on their life. folks who have worked with an entire school classroom group when a student was murdered. So this is obviously a very, very real topic for many of you and something that you can directly relate to. And as we said earlier, often a triggering topic for many of us as adults. So we hope that, that these recommendations that we're about to talk through will just kind of help to make you aware of some guidelines and considerations for the work that you are already doing with young people on this topic and in this area. So thank you all so much for your honesty and your willingness to contribute. There are more comments flowing in, but we'll move to Hilda because I'd like to have her start digging into what it is that we created and share with us some of these recommendations that you can find in the guide. And before, Hilda, before I turn it over to you, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have provided the guide to you in the handouts tab so that you can access it right there on your side panel. Hilda's going to be going over it with you, but we do encourage you and we'll continue to encourage you throughout the webinar to really take a look at it and read it when you have some more time and look at the resources that are in there. So without further ado, Hilda, I'd love to turn it over to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to work with the mentors who play such an important role in the lives of many of the fellows that at least I work with. So I want to thank you for that role. And I want to thank the members of this panel for their commitment to really sharing and understanding a little bit more about such a sensitive and difficult topic. And then the fact that 100% of you, that everyone on this call has known a young person who's experienced or witnessed a traumatic or violent event, that's really significant and illustrates why this is so important. So before we go through and review the steps in the guide, I wanted to focus a little bit on some of the challenges that we may encounter when we're talking to young people about trauma and violence. When we walk in, sometimes the misconception for many people about young men of color is that they're more reserved or resistant to talking about emotions. And so we want to kind of bust that myth because our experience has been that there's a great willingness to talk. They want to talk and they also want to know who they're safe talking to. And that's really where you come in as mentors. You play such a significant role in opening doors and opening conversations that potentially can lead these young people to other resources such as counseling or victim services, etc. So when we talk about creating spaces, I think Rudy did such an amazing job of depicting what that looks like at TFI. I want to highlight that some of the strategies that I use in connecting with youth, especially the fellows, is to always set parameters for every conversation. And so right from the get-go, whether it's a one-on-one interaction or a group interaction, we talk about what makes you feel safe in a conversation or in a relationship. What are your triggers? What sets you off? What should we avoid? What do you want to talk about? What's important to you? And we also provide conflict resolution skills, communication and listening skills, anger management skills. And by having all of these new abilities, young people can really start to create that safe space that Rudy spoke about. I also want to highlight that young men of color and men in general perhaps may have different ways of expressing their emotions. And it's really important that we understand the cues because sometimes we may assume that the conversation is closed when in fact the cue is, I need to talk about this. And so I often reference sort of that response, that primitive response that we all have to either have a fight response, a flight response, or to flee, or sorry, to freeze. When we talk about fight, that's pretty obvious. We may see perhaps verbal or physical aggression or attitude or whatever we want to call it, and that's not that hard to miss. When we talk about flight, we're really looking at someone who perhaps is avoiding these topics. And so if significant and traumatic events are happening in a young person's life, and they're avoidant of those topics, that is an invitation to communication. And the question would be, why? Why are you not comfortable talking about this? What would help you be more comfortable addressing these issues? And when we look at freeze, we really look at indifference. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. No, it didn't impact on me. So I often hear those responses. But when you put them in context of the situation, you realize that there's something here. There's a moment here, an opportunity to pursue a conversation further. So I'll often say things like, well, it sounds like it was a very, very tragic experience that your family had when someone, your uncle, was murdered. And you're saying that you're okay, you're okay. Tell me more about that. What does that mean? And just sort of pursuing that a little bit as opposed to seeing that as a closed door to conversation. And so when we talk about supporting youth in the wake of violence and trauma, it's always important to prepare ourselves. One is defining our roles. And as mentors, it's really important to highlight to you that you are a safe space for so many of the young people that you work with. And you're there to respect their feelings, affirm their experiences, to validate what's happening in their lives, but also to help them process some of that and start to think about, what can I do? What role can I play in my life, in my family, in my community to change some of these issues that are impacting on me? When we talk about doing your homework, it's really just about understanding the community, the culture, the family that your young person comes from. Different communities have high levels of violence, but at times the violence is coming from law enforcement. Other times it's coming from gang violence. Other times it's within the schools. And so it's really important to talk about safety, to understand what's going on in that community and how is that impacting on that young person. And lastly, we talk about knowing yourself, because we're all human and we have our own biases. We all get triggered. We have our limitations. It's really important that we go within and look at that before entering these conversations, because our responses and our reactions also serve as cues to young people, and we certainly don't want to shut the door to communication because of our discomfort or our reaction to very difficult topics. We encourage that you expand your cultural awareness and really work with triggers especially. So personal triggers and things that may make you uncomfortable, those are the things where I would say we can focus a little bit more attention in processing and sort of working through. And so in talking to young people about violence and trauma in their lives, it's important to acknowledge that what's going on is real. Trauma is defined by that person's experience, and so we will see all levels of responses to trauma and violence. Some people being very resilient and sort of being able to bounce back from those experiences. Others really, really being severely impacted. We know that when there are multiple traumatic events or violent events in a young person's life, it is so much more difficult to recover and to develop the inner resources to sort of continue to get over or process some of these feelings. And we know that a lot of the young people we're working with have had multiple losses, multiple incidents of violence that they've either witnessed or experienced. So it's just important to acknowledge that this is real. This is real and it's difficult, and let's think about how we can perhaps make a difference, how I can support you, how you can support yourself, and how you can impact on your family and community. We want to get young people thinking about what they can do, so to understand and cultivate critical consciousness. I like to ask young people questions like, it sounds like there are a lot of things that are out of your control. What can you control here? Who can help? In an ideal world, if you could resolve this, what would be the solution that you would hope for? And it really gets those wheels turning, and I think addresses that sense of impotence and hopelessness that often overcomes individuals who are frequently exposed to traumatic events. And In today's world, beginning the conversation is certainly not that difficult. You turn to the news, and you'll have plenty of subject matters that you can certainly bring in and address and ask your young people, how are you feeling about what's happening in your community? How are you feeling about what's happening in the country? What are your thoughts? And really just using that as a starting point. So in terms of providing the best support that you can to young people, we want to acknowledge complex emotional reactions and feelings while avoiding destructive messages. And so what has happened historically is that a lot of times individuals who are victimized are blamed for the victimization. You hear instances where perhaps when we're talking about police brutality against young men of color, a defense that many people may bring up, for example, would be, well, but young men of color practice violence against each other. Those messages are not helpful, and I think that we have to really steer away from laying the blame or the responsibility on the individuals who are struggling, and steer them towards self-reflection and critical thinking. When we talk about the range of emotional reactions that youth may have, they do express it in different ways. And so sometimes a youth may express a lot of anger, or as I said before, indifference about a situation. And we may respond in kind, assuming that that's where that young person is at. But it's always a moment to delve a little deeper, to ask more questions, or to revisit that at another time if it truly is something that you think is significant. Asking questions about safety is something that I think safety is something we take for granted. What is it like to feel unsafe around the people that should make you feel safe? We know that a lot of our young people have violence in the home and are exposed to domestic violence, perhaps even child abuse and emotional, physical, sexual abuse. That's not uncommon. We know that trauma impacts on the brain, and that individuals who are exposed to trauma have the likelihood of developing many more issues in the future if these issues are not addressed. And so when we're talking about safety, we want to make sure that that young people are safe in their schools, that they feel safe somewhere, or help them to identify those places and situations where they're safe, whether it's a community of faith, a community center, etc. When we talk about giving it time, for any person who has experienced trauma, it's not uncommon to be very cautious in establishing relationships. In young people, that may show up in the form of testing, sort of this back and forth where they come close and then pull away, and perhaps have a difficult time initially trusting or connecting. And so it's really important to understand that attachments in their lives may be very fragile. People may come and go without notice, without preparation. And it's really important for them to know that you're there for the long run. And if you have to transition out of your life, you're going to do it in a way that's sensitive. You're going to prepare them and support them through that transition so that it ends up being a positive memory in their lives as opposed to the many losses that they experience. We want to encourage you to commit to your own self-care. It really is okay to step away from these conversations and just have a good time with your mentee. Use humor, keep it light. Sometimes just taking a break from this allows us to come back to it from a different perspective. I also want to highlight that there's something known as vicarious trauma, and that is what happens to helping professionals and individuals when they are repeatedly exposed to stories about others' traumatic events. They themselves begin to internalize that trauma and experience it. And so that's really important that we just really stay in touch with what's going on within. And in some instances, you'll need to advocate. if a young person is struggling with emotional and mental health issues, and this is starting to impact on multiple areas of their life, like school, home, relationships, perhaps an individual who is trained to work with these issues needs to be called in at that point. And there are some great resources in this actual resource at the back that you can utilize. And lastly, we talk about building community. And I look at deepening your support and impact in two ways. One is really just taking care of the caretaker. Often in our role in helping others, we forget to take care of ourselves. But also developing resources and support networks with other advocacy groups, with other professionals who are dealing with similar issues, who are addressing these issues. Sort of expanding your own resources so that you're not doing this on your own. It's really essential to turn to your supports. We encourage partnerships such as TFI, Mentor, and MHA. We each bring our own expertise, and when we combine that, we can really more fully address the needs of our mentees. And lastly, we want to empower young people to set the agenda for a community conversation. And so encourage them to really work towards brainstorming, sort of developing strategies for dealing with what's going on in their lives and their communities to eradicate that sense of helplessness, to give them a voice and to give them some power. And you will find the resource gives much more detailed information, and I'm hopeful that this review is something that will pique your interest and get you really looking at this and provide you some strategies for working with young people who've been exposed to trauma. Thank you.
Hilda, thank you so much for that overview, and I think it was such a challenge to try to summarize everything that is in that guide, as well as a lot of the insights that you brought in from your work to the guide and to this conversation. So I just want to thank you for your excellent summary of all of those guidelines. And I'm sure we have tons of questions from our audience. We haven't seen any in the chat or in the questions box quite yet, so I'm hoping that folks will go ahead and type those questions in at this point so that we can direct them to our panelists. Because wow, what a rich topic, and so many questions buzzing through my mind. I'm wondering, Jen, if you've seen it.
Yeah, I saw a couple come in here, so please keep them coming. Hilda, this first one is for you. Some folks on the webinar today are working with younger mentees who may be in elementary school. Do you think the information in this resource is appropriate for younger mentees, or how might mentors tailor their conversations with younger mentees to be more age appropriate?
That's an excellent question, and I think one of the more important steps to take initially is to really be clear in terms of the adults in that young person's lives, what's okay. We certainly don't want to cross any boundaries or initiate conversations that perhaps the parent of a younger child may not be in agreement with. So I think having that trust and that connection to family members is also critical. In working with young people, I find that they're not so much verbally expressing their emotions, but through games, through art, through music. Those are some strategies that tend to work with young people who don't really have the vocabulary yet to talk about feelings and process emotions.
Excellent, thank you. Linda, the next question here is for you. We have a question about the TFI model. Someone wrote, it sounds like the fellows are engaged in a lot of activities, including STEM, the arts, and professional development. Are those all facilitated through the mentors, or have you developed partnerships in the community that help develop and facilitate those activities? And if so, do you have any advice for developing community partnerships and how you can go about recruiting organizations that have a similar mission to you?
That's a great question. Thank you, Delia, and thank you for whomever asked the question. So we do not provide all of those services and activities ourselves. We rely on a group of extraordinary partners, including Mentor and MHA. that just bring a wealth of expertise to the work. And the way that we identify partners is more art than science, I would say. And for those of you, I mean, all of us, I'm sure, have had different kinds of partnerships in the past. For us, we're really looking for organizations that are aligned with us in terms of their mission and approach to the work. We try to have an asset-based and holistic approach to working with young people, and there are a lot of organizations, I think, that are really expert in like one thing, which is great, but we want to work with groups that are looking at the whole person and are able to help contribute to our work with the whole person. So for us, we look for values, flexibility, and some evidence of effectiveness in terms of their approach. So I always ask, I mean, I'm a little bit nerdy about this, I guess, but I always want to read the reports and see some evidence of the work in action. I would say that that's how we generally look for good partners.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. We have another question. I think, Hilda, this may be a good one for you. It's coming in from somebody who's asking about whether you have advice for folks who are mandated reporters in the way that they handle this information when it comes up from young people, so people who are required by law to report on issues of abuse and neglect that they become aware of from young people. I'm just wondering if you can provide any insight on how mandated reporters should handle this sensitive information if it comes to their attention.
That's an excellent question, and after 30 years in the field, I still find that those instances when I have to report any type of child abuse or neglect, it's really nerve-wracking. It's one of the more difficult experiences. When I talked about creating safe spaces and setting parameters, one of those that at least I establish in working with young people is letting them know that anything and everything you want to talk about is safe here, is safe with me, unless, and then I go through, you know, sort of the different reasons that I might call law enforcement or report child abuse or something along those lines. And I reiterate that every couple of weeks, every time I have the opportunity, I remind them, because sometimes they're in such a comfort zone and they'll share something and then feel betrayed afterwards. So I want to really avoid that by continuously reminding them that my role, first and foremost, is to make sure that they're okay, to make sure that they're safe.
Delia, this is Linda. I just wanted to add to Hilda's response there that for us, that is always a huge question, and this is where having another partner really comes in handy, because as folks will get to know young people, I think it's really hard to make an objective call in some of those cases, and it's helpful to have an expert organization or individual consultant, whatever it is for your program, to serve as a sounding board and help you make some of those decisions.
Absolutely.
Definitely, that resonates. Thank you both for those insights.
And Rudy, the next question is for you here. Something you mentioned on your slide was that the TFA program challenges the definition of masculinity. And we've gotten a couple questions about that. Someone wrote, we find that the young men in our program are often uncomfortable sharing their feelings because they're afraid they'll be made fun of or teased by the other guys. So I guess this person's asking a little bit if you can explain how you kind of go about changing that definition and really encourage the young men to express themselves.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would say that there are a couple factors, or a couple things I should say we do. One is the types of experiences that the fellows are going through together and at the age that they're going through them really creates a sense of sensitivity towards one another. And throughout the program, we provide numerous opportunities to discuss these issues via workshops, conversations, etc. And in fact, MHA, the Mental Health Association of New York City, has provided numerous trainings for both our staff as well as come in and presented on what masculinity is, especially through the lens of, you know, hip hop or through other popular cultural vehicles to discuss what masculinity is. So we've both discussed it openly. We've had one-on-one conversations with specific individuals, and so I think we've created a very comprehensive environment in terms of making sure that everybody is aware that we're all different, we all have different experiences, that we come from different places, and so when we're speaking, we have to speak with that in mind. We have to speak with the idea that we don't want to offend somebody, we don't want to trigger anybody to feel upset in a space where we're really just trying to learn collectively. So there's a lot of things that we do. I mean, they include activities and all these other experiences. And when fellows are, for instance, dorming together, when they're rooming together, or when they're spending 10 days together in a tent, they have to learn to live together. And so a lot of those feelings will be superseded by the actual experience they're going through. And so I think Hilda mentioned this earlier too, that the arts and various activities and experiences is a venue and a vehicle for having those conversations, if you will. So I don't know if I fully answered the question, but I think there's also a lot of modeling going on as well in our group, and I think the role I play as a coordinator in the program, and that the mentors play, and all the adults, if you will, that are in the program, are constantly modeling positive behavior, positive language, etc. So I think it's pretty well-rounded in terms of our approach.
Thank you so much, Rudy. That was really helpful. Linda, this next question is for you. A lot of people have really appreciated seeing the theory of change on that slide, specifically the core developmental areas that you showed. So people are wondering, does the TFI program follow a curriculum, or are mentors trained to discuss those core developmental areas like networking, leadership development, and social emotional learning?
Thank you for the question. So we do not have one full curriculum for the entire program. I wish we did. But we do have a fabulous partner in Mentor, because we identified having a more structured approach to how our mentors work with the fellow as a great need in the program early on, and worked with the team at Mentor to come up with monthly webinar topics and action items for our mentors. So what we do each month is identify a theme that is aligned with our program activities for the mentors. So if we're focusing on college applications, then maybe the mentors are working on personal essay statements and they have a checklist, and we review that with them during the monthly webinars and provide them with examples on how to do that kind of work with the fellows. So as much as possible, we work to align whatever the mentors are doing with our program activities, and we rely on the support that we receive from Mentor to provide that ongoing structure and support for the mentors.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. We have another question for Hilda about that piece that you discussed about advocating for a young person who needs more support, specifically more support in terms of a therapist or a mental health counselor. If you recognize that that's what's needed, do you have any tips for how mentors or program staff can help support that transition or the referral to a mental health clinician? This person who wrote this question is saying that they've had, as I myself have also been challenged with, referrals that fall through, or that connection just never happens, and obviously that's not what we want. Do you have any tips for that?
Sure, but I also just want to validate that those are very real concerns, and it is very difficult to engage, especially adolescents, in any type of treatment. Sort of traditionally, they've been a bit more difficult to engage. One of the things that we do at TFI and MHA is MHA spends a good deal of time interviewing, be it by Skype or in person, by phone, different professionals in order to assess who would be a good match for that young person. We also ask that young person, what are your preferences? Do you feel more comfortable with a male, a female, someone younger? And they're very specific. They will often share exactly what and who they want in terms of counseling. So we really try to match them up. And in terms of resources, if you're talking about violence and trauma, every city has some type of victim services or crime victim services program, and those services tend to be free, and the individuals who are working for those organizations are trauma-informed professionals who are really equipped to deal with anything from bullying to homicide in the family to assault. And I think that's one great resource if you're looking for clinicians that are equipped to meet the needs of young people. What I do find doesn't work is sometimes sending young people to clinics where there are long waiting lists, where you know, one young man shared, I am seeing a counselor for a year and I don't feel I've gotten better. I feel like that person is waiting for the 30 minutes to end. And I was just surprised that his session was only 30 minutes. So it's really making sure that we're matching our young people with the right persons out in the community and doing our homework and research.
Thank you so much, Hilda. That was really helpful. At this point, I don't think we have any other questions coming through, or we may have some additional ones that we just haven't been able to get to. It looks like we'll have to kind of move towards wrapping up our webinar today. So we wanted to transition to talking through a few additional resources that might be useful to all of you. And just again, before we go through these, just want to thank you all for being so engaged throughout this webinar. I know there's probably so many more questions coming through, and hopefully you'll reach out to us if you want to follow up on any of those questions that didn't get answered. But first of all, we want to encourage you to read the full guide, which again is linked in your handouts section of your panel, and it's also on the Mentor website. And you can download the guide by opening the handouts section on your control panel, as I said, and downloading that PDF. We'd love for you to just take a closer look at the recommendations and guidelines that we reviewed today. We also want to encourage you to reach out to us for no-cost technical assistance for your mentoring program, whether you need help with recruitment, planning, program design, or evaluation, or anything in between. There are tons of free resources available through the National Mentoring Resource Center, which is a resource funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention and facilitated in a partnership with Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. So wherever you're located across the country, the NMRC is a resource for you, and there are tons of resources available at the link that you see here, including no-cost technical assistance for your program. Additionally, we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector, which is a national database of mentoring programs. This zip code searchable database allows mentors and mentees from across the country to find your program, and it's connected to LinkedIn, My Brother's Keeper, NBA Cares, and so many other avenues of free program advertisement. So just another way to draw the right mentors to your organization. So in the next week, the Mentor team will load this recording and the slides to our website, and you'll receive an email early next week that includes a link to access the webinar recording and slides. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Linda, Rudy, and Hilda. You all did an incredible job reviewing this important resource, and we certainly thank you for all the time you took in creating it and also in sharing more about it with us today. And I want to thank everybody who participated in this discussion. It was a great discussion, and obviously the folks on the line all care deeply about this based on what we saw in the questions tab. So we thank you for your participation and your work with young people across the country. We know that they need your support more now than ever. So thank you so much, and we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.